This week on the Encrypted Economy, we had Nancy Min. She is the chair of the Hyperledger Social Impact Group and the founder of Echolong LLC. Now, the Encrypted Economy has done a few episodes now with Atomize and Matzan on Hyperledger, and this week we continued that trend. Hyperledger is a private blockchain for private networks. Ethereum also has a private network implementation, but I believe that both Hyperledger and Ethereum, in the context of private blockchains, is only going to grow and accelerate. A lot of focus has been placed on public blockchain, but there is a confusion among policymakers. When they refer to crypto and when they define crypto, they think of the public blockchain. What they don't think about is the private blockchain. And in fact, many of the things that they propose, specifically some of the proposed changes to IRS code 1050I that I just covered in an episode with Abe Sutherland, they believe that they are regulating just crypto, which is in their mind the public blockchain. But what they don't realize is the long-term ramifications on private blockchains, and in fact, Hyperledger being scooped up in this as well. But back to this week. This week, I wanted to focus on some of the social good that blockchain can bring. And Hyperledger actually made that very easy. Once I started investigating, it was very easy to find the social impact group that Nancy Min leads. And in fact, it's an umbrella to multiple different social impact groups underneath that group. And their teams are pretty dedicated, and they're doing a lot of good things. And I thought it was really interesting, and it was great to find out about. So this was a great episode. Enjoyed it a lot. I hope to learn even more about some of the projects that they're involved in. Some of them are quite exciting, and Nancy gets into it on this podcast. So again, if you like this podcast, share. Share it with your friends, share it with one other person. Let's grow it. And we'll keep building the audience here. So, and with that, I bring you Nancy Min, chair of Hyperledger's Social Impact.
Welcome to the Encrypted Economy, a weekly podcast featuring discussions exploring the business, laws, regulation, security, and technologies relating to digital assets and data. I am Eric Hess, founder of Hess Legal Counsel. I've spent decades representing regulated exchanges, broker-dealers, investment advisors, and all manner of fintech companies for all things touching electronic trading with a focus on new and developing technologies. This is Eric Hess with the Encrypted Economy. I'm really excited today to have Nancy Min. She's the founder of Echolong and the chair of the Hyperledger Social Impact Group. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Eric. It's a pleasure to be here. Really excited to talk about some of the amazing things we're working on at Hyperledger as well as at Echolong.
Excellent. So let's begin with your background and Echolong's as well.
Absolutely. So I am kind of a business major that found technology to be really, really exciting and spent my career so far working in the tech space. Started off at Deloitte Consulting, doing a lot of tech consulting for the federal government as well as state and local. Did that for quite a few years and then transitioned it over into Echolong, where we're working on developing software solutions for the clean energy industry. And as part of my experience, kind of stumbled upon Hyperledger, and it's been happily ever after since then.
Excellent. So at this point in the podcast, often we give you an opportunity to say to share a singular personal event that shaped your values, your worldview, who you are.
I think that's an excellent point. I wouldn't say that there was one singular event that really shaped it, but a lot of micro events that happened in my life, from the day of sitting in business school and in a finance class, and we were talking about Bitcoin that had just come out during those years. It really I think that was the moment that really sparked my interest into blockchain technology. And then, pursuing a technology-focused career, I kept seeing blockchain technology pop up everywhere. And it was kind of like a calling that, I must look into this technology and must do something about this. And that, that's kind of what led me to where we are today.
Yeah, I think everybody has that sort of rabbit hole moment where, you hear it and you're confused about it. It's like, I can't really put it all together. And then there's you're just gosh darn it, I'm going to spend the time and I'm just going to dive in, right? I mean, there's no other way. It's like, you can't just like, oh, put your toe in and, oh, I get a little bit. You've got to like, there's so much, it's so much like drinking from a fire hose that there's just no way that you can just toe the water in. It's too hard. Anyway, so Hyperledger specifically. So what drew you, what's your origin story with Hyperledger itself?
So, tracing it back to the college days, so that was around when Bitcoin had come out. And, I remember we were talking about with Bitcoin, it's a public blockchain, right? And there's so many of these different use cases with cryptocurrency. And one thing that we kind of thought was kind of missing, and as we were discussing the technology, is, well, what is the fundamental premise of blockchain technology or distributed ledger technology? And one thing that we identified was that it's really a mechanism of sharing trust and of instilling those trust mechanisms. And so I think there was always a little bit of a gap in the industry where, what are the different ways that enterprises could actually utilize this sense of trust, and so, and as well as from this technology, right, and be able to implement them into some of the various systems. And Hyperledger came out a few years after we were looking into Bitcoin in college, but Hyperledger was specifically focused on enterprise-grade solutions. And it was about enabling trust for these enterprises, which was, I think, a gap that we saw missing in the industry. And so I'd been following Hyperledger since the very beginning. When I first heard the announcement, I was really excited about that. But I didn't actually get in touch with the Hyperledger team until I went to a blockchain expo in Amsterdam. And funny enough, we were looking into Hyperledger a lot, and I was ecstatic about the Fabric project as well as the other projects that were coming out, and stumbled upon at the expo, Hyperledger was expoing there. And that was where I met Daniela Barbosa, who's the VP of Worldwide Alliances at Hyperledger, as well as Marta. She was also a part of Hyperledger, and we were just talking about the different ways to use it. And we were talking about some of the pains that we were having at the time of using some of those underlying technologies. And then, I got invited to one of the meetups at Hyperledger Amsterdam that very evening. So I kind of just got plugged into this. And, I think one thing that's fantastic about the open source community, everyone's so welcoming. And so I was going in there and not knowing anything and not knowing anyone. And, it was great to kind of get immersed into that community. And since then, I've just gotten more and more kind of ingrained in there.
Excellent, excellent. And so shifting now to Echolong, how does the blockchain, how do DLT technologies factor into what you're doing with Echolong?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think one of the fundamental things about blockchain is it's going from the centralized database architecture that we're all very accustomed to, and it's going to this more decentralized architecture. What we're seeing in the clean energy revolution is the same exact thing, where we used to have centralized power plants, and now with distributed energy resources such as on-site, rooftop PV solar, we're transitioning to a much more decentralized way of generating our electricity from the grid's perspective. And one of the growing pains associated with that was our electric power grid was never built with that in mind. And so that's a gap that we saw blockchain technology as filling, as being able to provide that trust amongst kind of the overall grid perspective, but also helping as an enabling technology towards that decentralization.
And so how does your technology facilitate the exchange of, I guess, energy or clean energy amongst participants in that network?
Yep. So the use case that we're building, and we're funded by the U.S. Department of Energy to develop this, is what we call a peer-to-peer transactive energy platform. And the real concept behind that is allowing communities and neighborhoods to be able to share their excess energy that they've generated on their own rooftops with the rest of the community. So as a rooftop solar owner, you can actually sell your energy to your next door neighbor. And your next door neighbor who doesn't have rooftop solar, or maybe does, can buy and as well as do the sell transaction amongst that. And it's really just helping to enabling that interconnectedness and resiliency on a community level is what we founded Echolong as the founding principle.
Right. And I guess not in many cases, enterprises or even residents don't necessarily have the ability to store all the power that they may generate at different times. And so that would facilitate transferring it and crediting it easier.
Yeah, absolutely. Like if you have energy storage, what you can do is you could do energy arbitrage. You can sell at good price point times and be able to buy at low price point times. But if you don't, you would have the ability to actually monetize the energy that you've created for the grid.
Great. Excellent. So as a confession, I actually have solar panels on my roof, and I sell my energy to another aggregator and get SREC credit for it. So it's worked out okay.
Awesome. We'll have to talk more about that.
Yeah. And why do you think Hyperledger is a better choice for this kind of environment than other public blockchain protocols?
Well, so I think the public blockchain and then the enterprise permissioned, they all have so many benefits, and it really depends on how you're looking to apply and the particular use case that you're looking to kind of satisfy, or what the requirements are. I think on the public end, it definitely fills a huge gap in terms of enabling everyday users to kind of be, really that peer-to-peer process and kind of incorporating those into those things. But I think a couple areas why we went the permission route or the enterprise grade route is we needed to be able to have very high levels of throughput. If you think about energy transactions across the grid, there's a lot of transactions that happen, especially as we go decentralized. And that was an area that we thought made a lot more sense. Another area is there needs to be governance within these types of solutions, governance from the perspective of democratic consensus and things like that, but not for it to be a bottleneck for the overall platform. And so those are a couple of things that we saw as the enterprise grade gave a lot of benefits. The other aspect of it was that things like under the Hyperledger umbrella, like Sawtooth, Besu, Fabric, and all those, they're extremely modular, and it allows us to really be swapping out things that make the most sense for the use case that we wanted to apply. And so those were a couple of things that kind of really stood out to us as we were developing our solution.
Interesting. And then in Ethereum, if you're doing transactions on Ethereum, there's obviously GUI or gas fees. How is that addressed on, let's say, the peer-to-peer energy network?
Yeah. So, within the Ethereum network, you just like you mentioned, there are those gas fees and things like that to kind of facilitate the mining process and et cetera. On a permission network, right, you have more defined nodes, and you actually have much more defined consensus methods, and the transaction throughput is much higher. So that is not something that is considered as part of this platform. Whereas we have more organizational partners or consortium partners that are managing the throughput and managing each of those nodes that are facilitating some of those orderings. And so it's a little bit of a different architecture, and allows us to be able to do more on expansion of throughput, right? We can get to the thousands of levels and not be stuck at the 30 transaction per second problems.
Right. And you're not necessarily charging a gas fee per se. You might charge a transaction fee or maybe a monthly maintenance or something else, but it may not have that same fluctuation where you're dependent on sort of the public network, and then you wake up one morning and you try to do a trade and you're like, what? I was trying to do a trade this weekend, and it was like a very, I'd call it a small trade, and it was like thousands of dollars to do it. I'm like, on GUI, and I'm like, I don't know, I got to get better at using Matic, but anyway, we'll put all that to the side. So the social impact group that you're part of now, when was that founded?
So that was actually founded, I want to say 2018. So it was founded the year before I joined as the chair of the Hyperledger Social Impact Group. I think a couple of things that really stood out to me about the project and kind of the mission statement was, how do we find ways to apply blockchain technology for social good, for actually making impact on the world. And, so it was a great initiative, and we're still kind of, always willing to highlight different projects that kind of do some of these initiatives. And I'd be happy to kind of go a little bit more into some of the projects that we've seen over the years.
Well, we will. So, and you're the chair of the Social Impact Group. Was this something that you were part of the creation of, or was it already in existence and you just sort of, rolled into that role?
Yeah, kind of rolled into the role. I think they were, kind of in transition and trying to grow the community a little bit more. So I got pulled into it just from my previous interactions with the Hyperledger community. So it's been a lot of fun.
Excellent. So before we start to dig into the sectors and some of the projects, and it's actually very well organized. Like once I started doing some digging, I was like, wow, this is actually, I can, put a lot of this together. So kudos on that, and it is formative still, but it was somewhat easy to navigate. So there's a number of frameworks. You mentioned Besu, Fabric, Sawtooth, and then there's Aries, Indies, Umbrella. If you think it might make more sense to talk about the different sectors and then back into the different frameworks, we could do that too. Your choice.
Yeah, absolutely. So I can quickly kind of brief the sectors a little bit and what we kind of cover, and then talk a little bit about some of the frameworks and how we've seen it used a little bit. So a couple of things that as a social impact, we actually have a pretty broad base of interest, because there are so many different ways that you can apply impact projects across different industries. A few of them include like agriculture and land rights, climate, environment, digital identity, financial empowerment, governance and democracy, as well as health and wellness. And a couple of these actually also do step into some other SIGs that we also have. So in the climate environment brand, what we actually have is a climate action SIG, special interest group, that actually specifically focuses on that one. And the digital identity, so we actually have quite a few projects that I'll talk a little bit more about, such as the Hyperledger Aries and Hyperledger Indie, as well as Umbrella, that really kind of focus on that DID perspective. Financial empowerment, a lot of great use cases, and that one, as well as like governance and democracy, where we've seen things like voting play a huge role in developing different solutions. And then in terms of the health and wellness, we actually also have another SIG that focuses on healthcare, special interest groups, and different use cases. A couple of things that we've been focusing on a lot right now in the SIG, a lot of discussion has been in agriculture and land rights. So with the Food and Drug Administration, there's been a lot of movement on how do we use blockchain technology as a way of, for example, detecting fraud across the food industry. There's also things like using supply chain. So for the food and ag, some of the things that we saw with the pandemic, there was a food shortage at a certain point. And that's kind of where it was like, well, how do we get more traceability? How do we actually instill and know what's currently out in the general public? But when we look at kind of the different Hyperledger frameworks and the mapping between those, one thing that I will say is like all of the Hyperledger framework projects are extremely modular. You can actually build any kind of solution on any of those. But there are different ways that the industry has more commonly adopted these solutions, and I can kind of go through that a little bit. So if you think about like Hyperledger Besu is one of our newest projects. It's really exciting because what we're seeing is Ethereum. It's built entirely on Ethereum, and it is a permissioned enterprise grade version of that. And so you still have kind of the gas that's involved in it, but overall, like if you have developed solutions on Ethereum, you can port it very easily over and be able to build enterprise grade solutions on top of that. Hyperledger Fabric is one of the older frameworks that we've had, but not older in terms of the tech stack. It's still very, very innovative and involved. And this one was the one that is mostly led by the IBM team and extremely modular. We've seen Fabric be used in use cases across the board. Fabric actually has a food trust project where they're working with Walmart and quite a few other partners to kind of develop that out on that lens. Another project is Sawtooth, and Sawtooth is the one that is led by Intel, and we've seen Sawtooth primarily be applied in the supply chain use case. But however, the underlying code is still extremely modular, and it's still, you can still apply it in different ways of, whatever makes sense, and you can always plug and play with that. The other project that you mentioned was the Aries and Indie. And Aries and Indie, so Hyperledger Indie is actually the blockchain, the DLT. It's mostly used for DID, so decentralized identity. And Aries was built using Hyperledger Indie, but built as more of a plugin. So you can plug in DID into, say, your Fabric solution, your Sawtooth solution, or your Besu. It's really meant to kind of facilitate that identity portion and the access management portion of those various things. Another project is Hyperledger Iroha, which is actually mostly for like IoT as well as like different device use case of a blockchain solution. So I think try to give a little bit of a primer of the different umbrella projects, but there are still so many more that are coming out every day. And sometimes it gets a little bit hard to keep track.
Right. And before we maybe talk about which ones are getting more traction, because I also noted some seem to be like sort of moving at breakneck speed, and other ones that were still formative, which you would expect in any system. In terms of the funding for this, I saw that there are grants that are being applied for, and that's one stream. Is there like a Hyperledger grant program as well?
Yeah. So there's two programs. So every year there is a internship program. So a mentorship program is actually the right term, where we actually encourage, and Hyperledger will issue scholarships to students that are interested in continuing development and innovation of the various stacks, as well as like different use cases. So you can always propose a project, and you can mentor students to kind of build out those solutions across the board. Another one, I can't remember the name right now, but it's a way to actually fund a project. So it's kind of like the crowdfunding kind of mentality that Linux Foundation actually kind of hosts. And you can develop a brand new solution. You can kind of continue to refine some of these projects. We've seen like, I think Aries had one, Indies might have had one, where you can kind of crowdfund, you can get people to donate, and and kind of help build out the solution overall.
Excellent. So let's get into some of the meat of these things. So of these different projects, when I was doing my research, I came across Unicoins, I came across Moby, but we don't have to start there. Just we can mix those in. So which one of these social impact projects are getting the most traction, and maybe more specifically, where the clear wins are the most attainable?
Absolutely. I can highlight a few of them. And this is honestly my favorite part of my role is just engaging with these like innovative companies that are coming out with really like awesome ways that they're making an impact on the larger community. So one that actually comes right to mind is there is a United Nations Digital Identity project. And it was developed by the United Nations International Computation Center. And what they did was they took Hyperledger Indy, so the DID, and as well as some Aries aspects into this, and they built a digital wallet for United Nations personnel. And it's like a digital wallet that tracks their personal human resources like medical travel, payroll, security, pension plan. So all the way from like onboarding a employee all the way to like their parting and eventual retirement of them, all on Hyperledger Enterprise Indy. And so this is a great program. They're actually already in the process of rolling it out across United Nations, and this is something that they're going to be, they are actually already piloting. And so like that one was one that I loved hearing more about, and they actually presented at one of our social impact sessions, so you can actually see the recording off of our website. Another project is called Project Bakan, and this one I felt so much for when they also presented at one of our sessions. So Suramitsu, along with National Bank of Cambodia, kind of did this pilot project, and they're actually rolling this out too, to boost financial inclusion in the unbanked population. So especially in the rural areas of Cambodia, a lot of folks actually don't have a bank. They don't have a checking or a savings account. However, they saw an interesting thing where 50% of the population actually had a mobile phone. And so they created Project Bakong on the Hyperledger Iroha to allow them to be able to do transactions and to kind of have a bank account without actually having this bank account, and be able to, for a lot of folks that are working in other areas, to be able to ship money back home and be able to do all those things. And the pilot for this was of 16 banks, and they supported over 10,000 users across the country. So it was fantastic. Another great project. Really excited to hear a little bit more about. And another project that we were also got to listen to was a carbon tracing project by Covalent. So Covalent is a fashion brand that was launched by New Light Technologies. And what they did was they actually developed this blockchain project on Fabric, Hyperledger Fabric, to track the carbon footprint and supply chain as part of one of their products, which was air carbon. And so you can, as a purchaser, you get your unique identity on your merchandise. It could be an eyewear or it could be a handbag, and you can actually trace and track your carbon footprint from buying that. So that was a couple of different really cool things that happened, and it's happening right now. It's not projects that we have to wait a very extended period of time to see to come to fruition. Folks are actually doing this, and they're really leveraging these things.
Excellent. So to kind of go back to the one you started with the United Nations.
Yeah, they have quite a few projects. So the United Nations, I think, has been really kind of on the forefront of blockchain technology. They've been very inclusive, and I know they had quite a few challenges where they're challenging the United Nations teams, like across their various teams, to come up with different ways to build on top of blockchain technology. And so they were talking about some of the pain points that they had, right? So United Nations is all across the world, and they often have issues like tracking where everyone is. And for safety purposes too. And so this was one of the solutions that they came up with to be able to kind of make sure that all of their personnel were safe, and they knew where they are and stuff like that. Yeah.
Oh, great. Excellent. And then another one that was noted was the sugar industry, something that was done with the...
Yeah, so ripe sugar. So we also got to kind of hear about some of the things that they were doing in third world countries, and they were doing some supply chain related stuff. So that's also available as a recording on our community presentation. So if you guys are interested in digging more deeper into that, please do check that recording out.
Excellent. So, and then thinking across these different projects, one of them is sort of supply chain tracing with the with the environmental impact. Another one is knowing where the people in an organization are all over the world. Obviously, providing banking or allowing people to sort of capture, money and remittances into their wallets. Are those the most compelling areas, or are there still other areas, like as you look ahead for social impact, you say, this is great, we can, this is, and this is where I think the next big wave is going to come. Like, where do you think the next big wave is going to come in terms of marrying the goals of social impact with distributed ledger blockchain technologies?
I think you raise a really good point. So social impact can really be realized in, I think, any industry vertical and across many different projects. It's really kind of finding that fit where you're developing it for kind of the mission statement of the project. But the stuff that I highlight surely is not kind of the end all be all. So things like voting rights. So I think in Oregon they had two projects where they were looking at how do we track and trace each votes and ensure that those are verifiable and certifiable. So that's definitely in the government piece. In governance, that's, I think, going to be a huge push with some of the future projects. Another one that we're actually incubating as part of the social impact special interest group is the giving chain. So that is going to be focused. It's a project that's led by Bobby Mascara. She's also a part of the technical steering committee. She is right now kind of focusing on charitable gift giving. So how do we really track and trace, each of the items and, as you do donations across the board. And she's also focusing one on women's products as well as food from, Access Farms and different areas. So there's, quite a couple of different areas where I think, in the future, we're going to be seeing more and more of. And I think there's always room for innovation, always room for new ideas to come out across these boards. And definitely, I really appreciate, Eric, you highlighting this, because this is just such an important field that people don't quite notice yet. But I think, things are going to change. One thing I think in particular that we're right now in discussions with is corporate social responsibility. We've seen a lot of that happening over the last few years, and that growing awareness of this. But there's an aspect of it is how do we actually track and trace the impact as well as the different social responsibility goals that companies have, but being able to kind of see those in reality. And that is something that's actually led by the Climate Action Group. We're speaking with them about doing a collaborative effort on how we can kind of realize that. And in the European Union, this is actually a current policy and legislation that they're looking to roll out, is ensuring that corporates are actually fulfilling some of their goals.
And so how does distributed ledger technology facilitate that effort?
Yeah, so one of the ways that it can be done is really, helping to manage and track and trace in a transparent manner each of the, things such as if you went to, we had a goal of 100 or 1,000 hours of community service. We can track those hours and be able to and transparently relay that information to the public and be able to ensure that we're meeting those metrics. So those are one of the many ways, but there's also emissions, right? Like we're reducing our emissions. We can look at track and tracing for those and be able to also share those responsibly.
Right. So for different corporations, I guess to the extent that they had implemented this tracking in a way that, wasn't just we're telling you, but you could actually verify it through DLT technologies. You could actually almost, in I guess, real time in terms of when it's reported, be able to capture that and report it maybe in a more standardized way.
Yep,
and maybe
absolutely.
as more sort of a socially responsible companies, and these are the ones that we verified. So these get the, it's almost like maybe even a grading standard, right? Where some corporations, having fulfilled their social goals by, through these DLT technologies, were able to verify it, would have a higher grade than those who did lip service and didn't do anything.
Yep, exactly.
Interesting. I could definitely, and I guess, given the widespread adoption of Hyperledger in the enterprise space, do you see that corporation sort of turning, looking at Hyperledger as being the ideal framework, or do you see them looking at Hyperledger BesAt, or do you see them thinking public blockchain? How does, as we start to move towards something where maybe we're trying to create, I'm not going to say standard, but a way of capturing whether these goals are being met, are one of these is it public, what I call BesAt public-private, or, private blockchain? Which one do you think sort of makes sense? Which tool is right for the job?
Well, I think for each of the use case, there's different ways that you can implement them. I think one thing that this industry has been focusing on, and I think really rightfully so, has been on interoperability. And it's really hard to say that there's one solution that fits all. It's hard to say that all solutions fit all. But I think interoperability across the different DLTs, or across these different protocols, that's going to be a huge area of development. And, we actually have quite a few projects under Hyperledger that is focusing on some of those things. Like the recent one that came out is Hyperledger Firefly, which is focusing on kind of abstracting out the smart contracts and making it kind of like blockchain agnostics too. And so, I think some of those things, that's going to be like a huge area of focus. And once we figure out the interoperability issues, things like the public blockchain can easily be integrated with private, and there's really no need for one solution, but we can facilitate it across the various solutions.
Yeah, I mean, in my view, I see private blockchains or these more private networks proliferating even much more so. Like everything that's going on with Ethereum on the public blockchain is just going to drive even more private blockchains, because there's going to be more compelling reason to sort of have these, I don't know if you call it an enclave or something that's more secure, or maybe it's members only. It's permissioned, really. It's permissioned. So what's to come with the Hyperledger Sig group? What should we be looking for?
Yeah, so I think one thing we're right now kind of transitioning a little bit. I think there has been a recent push for us in our kind of community to move a little bit more towards agriculture. And so, we're seeing more and more of those use cases, a lot of our discussions, agriculture as well as circular economy. So that kind of that entire full circle process. So, definitely be on the lookout for us. We're going to be doing a little bit more on that. Another thing that we've been kind of focusing on is also looking at creating kind of hackathons so that we can kind of foster more of the community involvement into the various aspects of Hyperledger. So a couple of things that we're doing. So we actually, should be coming out with our part 2 of our circular economy blog post. We actually have a 4-part series. We released our part 1 over the summer. part 2 should be coming out over the next month or two.
Okay, well, we're going to have to get some links to drop them in the show notes so people can follow up. Anything that I should have covered here today that I didn't?
No, I think we went through everything. That this was a lot of fun, and definitely glad thank you for highlighting some of the work that Hyperledger's been doing. Hopefully we get more groups involved in this.
And before we go, I'm going to actually go back to Moby, which I raised and we didn't follow up on. So what is Moby?
So Moby actually is a initiative, an open source initiative that is led by Van Tro, and she's been focusing on the transportation industry and how can we really kind of develop out open standards using blockchain for transportation. And so this is going to be an upcoming meeting that we have at the end of September. And so she'll be kind of going kind of more deeply into the use case. So I don't want to give too much away before she does.
All right. I'm too ahead of it. I'm jumping ahead. Okay.
No worries. But please do, feel free to drop a link to the meeting. Happy to kind of, thank you so much for bringing that up so that we can advertise this beforehand.
That's right. It's coming up if you want to learn more about Moby. So where can people find out more about you, Echolong, Hyperledger Sig?
Yeah, so feel free to connect with us on LinkedIn. So the Hyperledger Sig actually has a LinkedIn page, a company page. And we also have a wiki page that we use to kind of, within that wiki page, we actually built a new member center. So if you're new and you're trying to get plugged into Hyperledger for social impact, feel free to check that out. And if you're interested in Echolong, happy to share our website as well as our company page with some information.
Excellent. Nancy, thanks so much for coming on the show today. It was great to have you.
Eric, thank you so much. It was a pleasure. Thank you.